So now what we're going to do is look at a couple of different types of flooding. In this case, we're first going to look at flash floods. Now, flash floods are usually caused by high precipitation in a small area. I've mainly got some examples of flash floods to share with you. These are pictures of a flash flood that happened in Sedona in September of 2009. I actually remember when this happened because I was watching the news when they were reporting on it. It happened really fast. There wasn't just a whole lot of rain in Sedona itself, but if you've ever visited Sedona, the Tlaquepaque area is a little, there's a lot of art studios, but it's all really low right along the river. And this is right in the parking lot there of Tlaquepaque. The good news is there were no injuries or deaths. The only real big kind of scary part was a car hit the side of a building and busted a gas line, and they had a gas leak they had to take care of. But otherwise, you can see just kind of how fast the water's moving through here. And that red color comes from the sediment, but everybody knows the red rocks of Sedona, and that's all mixed in. This is one of my favorite pictures, though. Kind of in the background to the right, you can see some stairs of the parking lot, and in the foreground, there's two cars. But those cars are turned like perpendicular to each other because we're looking at like the backside of a car that's under the other one. And this happens really, really, really fast sometimes. I don't know if y'all remember this, but the Phoenix area had a series of flash floods back in 2014 that were pretty devastating. The picture at the top is from a school bus, actually in the northern part of the valley. It was reported that there were actually no students in the school bus at the time because this is one of the dumbest things you can possibly do on a flooded road. And luckily the driver got through, but if I remember right, the driver was actually was fired because of this. Along the bottom, they're doing a rescue of a woman that actually got caught up in her car there. But they were able to save everybody that was in there. Maybe it's a dude. Anyway, they were doing a water rescue here. So during the flash floods that we have here in the valley, usually this is because of a monsoon rain or a particularly fast falling rain. In this case, we got like 4 inches of rain within an hour, and we average around 7 inches of rain all year. So that's like half of a rain falling in an hour, and it came hard and fast through here. Because Arizona is arid, our water doesn't soak into our soils very well, and we have very, very few soils themselves. And so we are prone to flash floods here. Here's another couple of views on the top. This is the town of New River on August 18th. On the bottom, that's actually my neighborhood that I was trying to leave on September 8th. That's one of my own pictures. We saw that it was flooding, and so my husband and I left our house out in the West Valley at about 6:30. I dropped him off in downtown Phoenix and kept going to Mesa, and I reached my office by about 10:30. It took me about 4 hours to get across town, which was ridiculous. But if you remember, like the I-10 was literally standing in water. There were cars floating on the I-10 out in the West Valley. So yeah, this one was a nasty one. But flash floods can also be where you have a fairly narrow river valley. In particular, those headwaters we were looking at earlier where you have rivers with V-shaped valleys. So if you think of the equation for discharge, in a V-shaped valley, the river can't get much wider because of how steep and narrow the valley is. That means the water's got to get faster and it's got to get higher. So you end up with these really big floods, like walls of water shooting down canyons and river systems. And that's one of the reasons why the Colorado Plateau is so prone to flash floods. Now, Payson had a flash flood in 2017 that turned deadly. Here's another one of those shamelessly playing you a video. This one's not as long. This video is by a man named Brandon West. I think he's actually from Chandler. And he was out along Tonto Creek when this happened, and apparently he wasn't sure he was getting out alive. Here we go.
If I make it out of this alive.
Holy fuck.
Sorry, I forgot there was quite a bit of language.
Stuck in the middle of a fucking river.
I don't know how the fuck I'm gonna get out.
So during this, he was holding on to his dog and his backpack and trying very hard not to die. You can see he's pretty shooken up there and quite messy because this was sort of towards the end of it. So this happened along Tonto Creek up just north of Payson. This was July 15th, 2017. Now, this particular area is a really popular swimming area, and there were a lot of folks there, and this is why this particular flood is so well known, because there was a family who was swept away and killed during this particular flood. There were 9 people killed, and 5 of those were kids between the ages of 2 and 13. There had been some warnings, but it wasn't raining here in Payson. It's not like they would look around and be like, hey, this river is probably dangerous. All the rain and all the flood was pretty far upstream. And so it takes a lot of kind of forethought and planning ahead of time to really know where particular monsoon storms are happening, because it dumps a lot of water really quick. The report said that when the flash flood hit this area, the water was 6 feet deep and 40 feet wide. Contributing to it was there was a fire upstream just early before this particular flood happened. And loss of vegetation can lead to flash floods too, because when a fire goes through, it makes a layer of soil that we call hydrophobic. And so after an area burns, if it rains on there, the water just shoots off of it because it won't absorb any water at all. And so that's what made this so dangerous at this period of time. Of course, that's not the only one. Just recently, the day after Thanksgiving, just last year in 2019, there was a family that was out driving. They had like a military type truck. There was a couple. They had their kids along with 5 other kids, their cousins from their family. And they were trying to cross Tonto Creek, again, back to the Tonto Creek. They were trying to cross Tonto Creek at a place called the Bar X Crossing. And apparently this is a place that's pretty well known for flooding. And the road was closed at the time. It was actually barricaded. And the guy driving it, his name is Daniel Rawlings. He decided to go around the barrier and take his chances, and the whole truck was swept away. In all, there were 3 kids that ended up dying here, and you can see their photos. And if you watched any news during this period, you saw these faces over and over and over again. Daniel and his wife Lacey were both in the truck. 2 of their children were killed, and a cousin of their kids was also killed. The parents escaped out of the car with 4 kids along with them. So that was quite a truck full of people. What sort of has come out of this, actually just earlier last month, they announced that this couple was being charged in this event. The father, who was the driver, or the man who was driving, he's been charged with 7 counts of child abuse because there were 7 kids in the car that were put in danger, and 3 counts of manslaughter for the kids that were killed, including 2 of those that were his own. And his wife also faces the 7 counts of child abuse. following this event, there was actually a bill passed through the Arizona House to fund a bridge being built here, and that's apparently something that's been asked for quite a bit. Is a bridge because of the major flooding that happens along here. So, there's just some bumming out stories, but during these flash floods, being in the car is one of the most dangerous things you can possibly do. So flash floods are the most deadly the most deadly weather-related event in the United States. So, when we think of scary weather, we think of, hurricanes or tornadoes because it's tornado season. But really, it's these flash floods that are the problem. And it's pretty scary when you think about it. In all, something like 40% of people who are killed during flash floods are actually in a car, just like these folks here. And so it's pretty important to make sure not cross those closed roads or those flooded roads. I know the Maricopa County reminds us to be flood smart all the time in their commercials, but a car can be completely picked up by just 2 feet of water. It doesn't take much at all. So as they say, turn around, don't drown. And in particular, don't go around road closed signs, because we do have a stupid motorist law here in Arizona. And that says if you go around one of these closed signs and get trapped in the flash flood or whatever flooding it happens to be, and somebody has to come rescue your ass, you get the bill for it. Search and rescue is not cheap, and helicopters are particularly dangerous. And so, so flash floods are really, really dangerous in terms of life. Here's a few other examples. This is that same Havasu Falls flood that I mentioned earlier. You can see on the picture left, that's how Havasu Falls used to look like. And you can see why they're called the people of the blue-green waters. And on the right is a shot from August 18th, 2008, where there is not not a lot of pretty blue left. It actually completely ripped out part of that waterfall. Another fall a little bit higher up, if you keep hiking up from Havasu Falls, is Navajo Falls, often seen as one of the most beautiful waterfalls in the world. Well photographed, at least before. On the left is the before picture, and on the right is what Navajo Falls looked like after the floods were done. It actually completely rerouted it, so the new course is, I believe it's been shifted over to the right, and minus those beautiful pools and stuff. Now, of course, they've rebuilt some since 2008, the pools themselves, but this is an area that is prone to repetitive flash flooding, so this isn't the only one they've had. The only one was in 2008. This was particularly hard on the tribe because they do rely solely on tourist money. And it took a while to rebuild all of their infrastructure there that the tourists rely on. So their economy was down for quite a bit after this, and because of some of the further floods. All right, so flash floods, big, fast, scary, versus what I refer to as the floodplain floods. These are going to happen in the lower reaches of your rivers in the big flat areas. The good news is that they have a lot fewer deaths, but they last a lot longer and cause a lot more damage. So floodplain flood is where you overtop the levees and the water stretches out really wide. So if we go back to that equation for discharge, where Q equals width times depth times velocity, in this case, your depth isn't necessarily getting a whole lot bigger, but your width gets bigger because it's able to stretch out. The width of your river stretches out really wide to fill part of that floodplain. And as that width goes really, really wide, the velocity goes really, really low. So in some of these cases, water doesn't actually flow very fast at all, and this ends up stagnant. And that's how you end up with some of those floods like in China, where water stands for months on end, which is pretty scary in and of itself. So for an example here, these are the Midwest floods that happened back in the 90s. I know a lot of you may not have even been alive at this point, But I sort of remember these. I was fairly young at the time. But this is the before shot. So this was taken in August of 1991. And this particular time period was chosen to sort of look at the same kind of time period within the year to compare. But this is a pretty nasty place. It's the confluence of the Illinois and the Mississippi and the Missouri River all here at once. For those of you kind of following along with semester project stuff, the home I chose while I was looking up stuff for the semester project is right between the Mississippi and Missouri River, right where they come together. So this is what it normally looks like. You can see lots of agriculture. That's what all the green and the pink is for the most part. And this is 1993 during the flood. And you can see my whole little town is completely underwater. And there's places where the water went from being, 300 meters wide to being over 500 kilometers wide. In some of these cases along the Mississippi, the water stood as deep as 20 feet. And it lasted for months and months and months. This actually took down a lot of the economy in the United States because of the long-term flooding here. Because you notice all the fields and all the agriculture, this is the breadbasket of the U.S. But it lasted so long that it destroyed the crops that were planted. They lost an entire growing season in the middle, and then they couldn't plant during the third kind of planting session during these floods. So they actually lost 3 whole growing cycles through here. And so it had a pretty big impact on the U.S. and particularly food prices went up pretty high during this time. Lest you think it just happens along the Mississippi, Phoenix has actually had some of these too. Now, these are often due to long-term weather patterns. And so a lot of these pictures I'm about to show you is some of the worst floods that the Phoenix Valley has experienced. You'll see a lot of Tempe here. Over the winter of 1965 and 1966. One of the big things was a lot of snow and the White Mountains. Now, you think the White Mountains are all like way out east. But that water ends up draining into the Salt River and being carried down this direction. And so that flooding upstream in the drainage basin feeds downwards. And so on the left is a picture of what Tempe Stadium looked like. Or Sun Devil Stadium. You can see they've built quite a bit onto that since then and added a whole lot of parking lots. This is prior to the dams that formed Tempe Town Lake. But you can see just how high the water went. I know back in the early 1900s, there was a flood that the water got so high along the Salt that it actually wrapped all the way around a mountain or Tempe Butte, whatever you want to call it there. This is what the Sky Harbor Airport normally looks like. This is just a few years old. There's been some changes since then. But you can see where the I-10 crosses. Where the I-10 crosses the Salt River. And it's pretty channelized there. And this is what it looked like during those floods. And you can see it actually shut down a couple of the runways of Sky Harbor there. My understanding is that you can see that I-10 bridge there. During these floods, every single bridge that crossed the Salt River within the Phoenix area, so all the way out from way out west to way out east, every single bridge was damaged enough that they were unusable. The only one that was still standing and still usable was the railroad bridge at Mill Avenue. And so I had somebody tell me a story once because they lived in Phoenix at the time. And just like now, a lot of people commute, from the East Valley and South Valley into Phoenix. And so to get to downtown Phoenix, people would pull up, they would hop on a little train that would take them across that railroad bridge. And then they would hop on some other sort of transit to go to work and repeat it. And that was until the bridges were fixed. I just like this shot because there's like waves big waves there with Camelback and the plains in the distance. Here's a shot from 1914. I've got other pictures of like really old floods throughout Arizona. But yeah, so these are those floodplain floods. They aren't as deadly, but they're a lot more expensive and they last a lot longer.